Welcome back. Today we are going to start talking about supervised learning, and in particular our focus will be on supervised learning methods that are based on computing distances. So we have already talked about what supervised learning is, but just to give a quick recap, in supervised learning we are given some labeled training data, for instance images of dogs and cats, labeled images, and um, this training data goes into a supervised learner which produces a prediction model. In this case, it will be a classifier for cats versus dogs. Then at test time, we are given a test image, which goes into this prediction model. And then we get uh, a label as a prediction. Now, one very important thing to keep in mind regarding machine learning is that, and it is not specific to just supervised learning, but rather other approaches as well, such as unsupervised learning or reinforcement learning. And this aspect is that the training and test data sets should be similar to each other. So just like in exams where we don't like if we get out of syllabus questions, likewise machine learning algorithms don't like it when the test data set does not look similar to the training data set that the model was trained on. Okay. So in this particular example that we are looking at in the slide, if we have trained this model on color images of dogs and cats, and if at test time we get black and white images or something like sketches of cats and dogs, then you should not expect this model to do well because the test data set is not similar to the training data set. So essentially, and in some more formal sense, we can say that machine learning algorithms expect the training and test data distributions to be the same. Now, does it mean that there's no hope of doing machine learning if this assumption is violated? Well, no, that's not the case. In fact, there do exist several machine learning techniques that allow us to handle such situations where the training and test data distributions are not the same. These techniques are a bit advanced, so we will not talk about them right away, but at some point we will discuss some of these techniques. Um, if you just want to know about the names of such techniques, you can look up methods like domain adaptation, covariate shift, or transfer learning. So these are all techniques that allow us to handle the case when the training and test distributions are not the same. So various types of machine learning problems can be posed as supervised learning. To give you a sense as to what these different kind of problems are, suppose we are trying to build an ML plugin or module for our email client. Now we might like or we might want this module to perform various types of tasks. For instance, we may want this module to predict whether an email that we receive is spam or not. So this is a classic example of a binary classification problem. Likewise, we may want this module to predict which of the many folders that we may already have in our email client an email should be sent to. So this is an example of multi-class classification because we may have, let's say, two or more folders, and the goal here is to send the email to the appropriate folder. So this is an example. This is the generalization of binary classification because we may have more than two classes. So this is known as multi-class classification. Uh, Another task that we may want this module to perform is that of predicting all possible or all relevant tags for an email. So some of you might have tried tagging email in Gmail. For example, if you can create tags and then for every email you can assign one or more of those tags. So this is an example of a tagging application, and formally this problem is known as a multi-label classification because essentially each tag is a label and an email can be assigned one or more labels. Besides classification, we may also have an application where we may be interested in predicting the spam score of an email. So spam score is typically a real valued number, which is why this example comes under a regression problem. Uh, we may also be interested in predicting or kind of coming up with a prioritization of emails that we receive in our inbox. So if we would like our ML plugin to show the most important mails at the top, then this task is essentially a ranking task. Finally, Another type of classification problem that we may be interested in is where we want to just classify um, our emails into one class versus all the other classes. Okay, so suppose we want our ML plugin to classify whether any email is a work or study related email versus all the other types of emails. So if this is, you have one class which is work or study related emails, and all the other types of emails are from the other class. So this, in this case, it's not really a binary classification problem, because you have one class that you are interested in, and all the other classes are kind of like grouped together into another class. So this is another a specific example of a one class classification problem. Now, as I already said, all of these predictive modeling tasks can be formulated as supervised learning. In today's discussion, we will focus on a very simple supervised learning algorithm, which can be used for binary and multi-class classification. The algorithm that we will look at will not require any very complicated math. All it will require you to be able to do is know how to compute means of data points and how to compute distances between data points. Before we proceed further, it will be useful to introduce some notation and convention that we will be following for the rest of the lectures. Firstly, in machine learning, we usually assume all the inputs to be represented as vectors. And in machine learning, a vector essentially represents an array of scalar values. So as this figure shows, you have an array of 8 elements. This is a vector, and each element is a scalar value. You can also think of a vector from in a geometric viewpoint, and a vector is essentially a point in a vector space. So if you have a length 2 vector, you can think of this as a point in a 2D space. Likewise, if you have a length 3 vector, it's simply a point in a 3D space. So here we have a 2D vector represented as a point in a 2D space. Likewise, here we have a 3D vector, a length 3 vector, and then this vector is represented as a point in a 3-dimensional vector space. You can also think of a vector space representation for vectors that are even higher dimensional, even though it is harder to visualize, but the same intuition applies, that any vector maps to or can be thought of as a point in a high dimensional vector space. Further, unless we are specifying otherwise, you should always assume that small letters in bold font will denote vectors, small letters in normal font will denote scalars, capital letters in bold font will denote matrices, which are nothing but 2-dimensional arrays. Moving on, some more notation. So whenever we are representing a single vector, we will assume this vector to be of the form x as x1, x2 up to xd. So this x is a vector, and it's denoted by a collection of the d many scalar values. Also, whenever we are talking about a vector, we will always assume these vectors to be column vectors. So this will be so if we have a vector like x equal to x1 through xd, we will assume that this is a column vector of size d by 1. If each element in this vector is a real valued scalar, then we can also write x as belonging to r to the d by 1 or just r to the d. So where this r is the space of real numbers. So this is another notation that we will be using when we refer to the dimensionality of a vector. Also, if suppose we have x as a d-dimensional vector, suppose it's a feature vector representing an image, then d here denotes the dimensionality of the feature vector. So whenever I refer to the dimensionality of a feature vector, it always refers to how many features are present in that feature vector. So d dimensionality is essentially the number of features. Xi here, which is a scalar, will denote, note that xi is in like a normal font. So this will denote the value of the ith feature in this image x. So bold x denotes the entire image. This xi denotes the ith feature in the image. Now, in many cases, we will not be referring to just one vector, but often multiple vectors. So whenever we are referring to multiple vectors, we will be using a subscript to denote which vector we are referring to. Okay. So suppose we have n images, that are denoted by n feature vectors x1 through xn, which can be more compactly written like xn, n small x with a small subscript n going from n equal to 1 to capital N. So these are a collection of feature vectors. So x subscript small n denotes the nth image. Moreover, if we are using xni, which is going to be a scalar quantity, so this is nothing but the ith component of the vector xn. So this denotes the ith feature in the nth image. So these are some of the notations that you should keep in mind for the rest of the models that we will look at in this course. Now, having seen the notation and the convention, let's talk about some of the basic operations that we can perform on these vectors. Firstly, a very simple operation like addition or subtraction of two vectors will also give you a vector of the same size. So that's kind of the most primitive operation that you can perform on two vectors. We can also compute the mean, which is also known as the average or centroid of n vectors of the form xn, n goes from 1 to capital N. So the mean is is computed like this. We already talked about how this in the previous class, but I just wanted to recap. Note that the mean that we compute like this will always be of the same size as each of the individual vectors. We can also define an inner product, which is also known as the dot product of two vectors. Suppose we have a vector A in D dimensions, another vector B in D dimensions, then the inner product of A and B is denoted using this notation or convention. So in brackets we have we write it A comma B, also A transpose B. So both of these refer to an inner product between two vectors, and inner product is nothing but component wise multiplication followed by a sum over all the components. So there's a typo here. This small d should be capital D. I'll fix this typo. Okay. So note that the inner product or dot product of two vectors will give us a real valued number denoting how similar these two vectors are. Okay. So that's kind of the intuitive meaning of what the inner product of two vectors means. So it always denotes the similarity of two vectors A and B, assuming that they both have unit Euclidean norm. So if these vectors have been normalized to have unit Euclidean norm, then the dot product refers to the similarity between these two vectors. So what is a Euclidean norm, by the way? Well, if we have a vector A in D dimensions, its Euclidean norm is defined as the inner product of the vector with itself. Okay, so this will be so Euclidean norm is defined in this notation. So this like in the middle of two vertical bars, W vertical bars. So you have this as the notation for Euclidean norm, and it's A transpose A square root of that. Okay, so this is how a Euclidean norm of a vector is defined. You can think of the Euclidean norm as being the distance of the vector from origin. So that's one interpretation of Euclidean norm. Also, a Euclidean norm is sometimes also referred to as the L2 norm. So that's another name of the Euclidean norm. So we have seen vectors and some of the operations on vectors. Now let's look at how we can compute distances between vectors, because that's something that the model that we will look at in today's lecture will be based on. So the Euclidean distance, which is also known as the L2 distance between two vectors A and B, both in D dimensions, is given by this expression. So I'm using the subscript 2 here. So D of AB is denoted defined like this: A minus B, the L2 norm of this difference vector. And this is Euclidean distance is nothing but component-wise difference between the vectors squared, summed over all components, and then taken square root. So that defines the Euclidean distance. All of you must be knowing what this is. More compactly, you can also write a Euclidean distance as the inner product of the difference vector. So if you take the difference vector A minus B and take the inner product of this vector with itself, you get and take the square root, then you get the Euclidean distance. So Euclidean distance is nothing but the square root of inner product of the difference vector. Which you can also expand and write like this in terms of the inner product of the vectors themselves. So A transpose A plus B transpose B minus 2A transpose B. So that's another expression in terms of the inner product of the individual vectors. We can also generalize the Euclidean distance into something called the weighted Euclidean distance between two vectors. So the weighted Euclidean distance looks very similar to the Euclidean distance that we saw earlier, except that with in this summation that we had in the case of Euclidean distance, we have another weight associated with each term. So we have a wi sitting here. So it's always like each component wise difference squared multiplied by a number wi. Okay, so that defines the weighted Euclidean distance, where wi is the weight that we are using in these distance computations. So if a and b, they are feature vectors, then you can think of wi as some sort of a weight or importance associated with this ith feature. Okay, so that's the significance of this weight. More compactly, you can write it again very similar to how we write Euclidean distance: a minus b transpose w times a minus b. What is W? Well, this is nothing but a matrix. It's a diagonal matrix of size d by d with the individual weights wi's sitting on the diagonals. Okay, now these weights may sometimes be known. If you want to compute the distance between two inputs, you may want to pre-specify the weights based on some prior knowledge that you may have, or these weights can also be learned in many machine learning problems. Okay, we will look at this aspect later on, but you should keep in mind that this weight matrix may, or these individual weights may or may not be known. They can even be learned in various machine learning problems. So in this example that I was showing you, W was assumed to be a diagonal matrix, but more generally, W can also be a full matrix, full symmetric matrix of size d by d. If that is the case, then this distance function is typically known as the Mahalanobis distance. Okay, so named after the famous statistician P.C. Mahalanobis. We'll talk about Mahalanobis distance in more detail later on. But the weighted Euclidean distance can be further generalized to yield the Mahalanobis distance. Okay. Also note that if you recall, in the previous class, I was talking about the importance of feature scaling. Okay, where the idea is that if we have multiple features, and if some of the features have a much larger scale as compared to the other features, then we may need to rescale the features so that they all come to the same range. A similar kind of effect can be achieved by simply using a weighted Euclidean distance. Okay, because if you can see that since with every component of this vector we have a weight associated. Okay, so the rescaling factor can be kind of like used as can be used as a proxy in form of this this weight that we have in the weighted Euclidean distance. So feature scaling is kind of related to using a weighted Euclidean distance, or in fact a Mahalanobis distance. Apart from the Euclidean and weighted Euclidean distance, we also have the absolute distance that is also known as the L1 norm distance. So this L1 norm distance between two vectors A and B is defined as the absolute value of the component wise differences followed by a summation over all the components. Okay, so this is what it looks like. The L1 norm distance is also known as the Manhattan distance, or the taxi cab norm. Because if you think of this distance, this is very similar to imagining you have a grid of roads in a city, and the roads only go vertically or horizontally. So if you have to reach from point A to point B, you can only take vertical or horizontal roads. So in some sense, the amount of distance covered in getting from point A to B in that kind of a grid structure is similar to the kind of way the way we compute distances using the L1 norm distance. Okay, so L1 norm distance, L2 norm distance, these are only some of the distance measures that we have. There are various other ways of computing distances. For instance, L infinity distance, which is equal to the max of the absolute value of the element-wise difference between the two vectors. So there are various other types of distances that we can define over vectors. So having seen the notation, the convention, and the various operations on vectors and methods for computing distances between vectors, now let's get started with our first supervised learner. As I already mentioned, our first supervised learner will be fairly simple. All it will require is computing means of data points and distances between data points. Now, before I actually talk about the supervised learner, let me start with a more basic classifier, a very, very primitive kind of a classifier, which will hopefully set the stage for what we are going to see next. So for this very primitive classifier, suppose we are interested in solving a binary classification problem, cat versus dog. And in this very simple problem setting, suppose we have some training data which consists of only two images, one cat image and one dog image. It's a very, very simple, oversimplified setting, just two training images, one cat, one dog. And now given a new test image, which could be either a cat or a dog, how do we predict its label? Okay. Now, a very simple idea to make the prediction will be that we can compute the distance of this new test image from each of these two training images. So we can compute the distance of the test image from the cat image and the distance of the image from the dog image. And then if the distance from the cat image is smaller than the distance from the dog image, then we predict the label as cat, otherwise a dog. Now this distance function itself can be one of the various types that we saw earlier. It can be a Euclidean distance, weighted Euclidean distance, L1 distance, Mahalanobis distance, but some distance metric that we can use. But the prediction rule would be simply to compare the distance of this test example from the cat image and the dog image, and then based on the distances we can make the prediction. Of course, this idea will also apply to multi-class classification. If we have more than two classes and one image from each class, we can do the same thing. We can compute the distance of test image from each of the training images, and then based on that we can predict the label. Now at this point you might be wondering, are we doing machine learning here? Because all this approach is doing is just using a simple rule, compute distance and then use the distances to make a prediction. So where is the learning part in all of this? Okay, because as we have talked about in the very first lecture, machine learning is about machine learning is a data-driven approach that we learn something from the data and then we make predictions, right? So where is the learning part in all of this? So that's a great question if you had this kind of a question. Now, even though in this example we are only computing distances, this model can be learned, because before we actually get to the point of computing distances, we need to do several other things. For instance, we have to extract features from the images, which itself may require learning, because we may have a learner or a learning algorithm to extract the features. So that's one aspect where learning can kick in. The other aspect where learning can be can be there is the way we are defining the distances, right? So if we are not using something as simple as a Euclidean distance, suppose we are using a weighted Euclidean distance or a Mahalanobis distance, there we can actually learn the parameters of the distance function. So that is another part where the learning can be present. Right? So even though this apparently this example seems like it's a simple rule-based classifier, depending on how we actually get to this point of comparing distances, we may have several steps, each of which or one or more of which may require you to do some sort of a learning from the data. Okay, so this is a very, very primitive classifier. Now it was a rather simple classifier. Can we improve it further? And the reason why this classifier was very simple or primitive is because we were only using one input per class. And if you're just using one input per class, then it may not be able to sufficiently capture the kind of variation that you may have in the data from that class. So clearly a more natural or more appropriate way will be to use not just one input, but more than several inputs from each class, so that the variation in the class can be captured more appropriately. Okay, so this is what you might want. You may want to have multiple images from each class. Okay, and now how do we extend our primitive classifier that we just saw, which was just using distances, to handle the case when we have multiple images from each class or multiple inputs from each class? So we will look at two specific approaches to solve this problem. The first approach will be referred to as learning with prototypes, or LWP, which we will look at today. And the second approach is known as the nearest neighbors approach, or NN, which will be looked at in the next lecture. As I already mentioned, both of these approaches will use multiple inputs from each class, but in reasonably different ways. So let's first talk about learning with prototypes. So the basic idea in learning with prototypes is to represent each class by a prototype vector. Okay, so what is a prototype vector? So the prototype of every class is nothing but the mean or average of all the inputs from that class. Okay, so you take the data from every class, you average all the inputs from that class, and you get the class prototype. So as an example, suppose we have images of handwritten digits from like digit 1 to 9, and we can take all the digits from all the images from each digit, and then we can compute the average image. So this is what each class prototype. We have 9 classes, and the prototypes look something like this. Okay, and now once we have these class prototypes, uh, at test time, when we get a new test image, we can compute the distance from each of these prototypes, and based on the distances, we can predict the label. Okay, so the predicted label will be the class that is the closest to the test input. So that's the simple idea behind learning with prototypes. Now, one very important thing about learning with prototypes is that how we compute distances from of the test input from each of the prototypes is going to play a big role in the performance of this model. So the accuracy will depend quite critically on how we are computing distances. So there are various options as to how we compute distances. We may try out a Euclidean distance, weighted Euclidean, Mahalanobis, or some other more sophisticated distance function. But again, the way so for different data sets, different type of distance functions may be appropriate. To further illustrate the idea of learning with prototypes, let's look at an illustration. So we will focus on the problem of binary classification. So we will have two classes, and we will assume the classes to be positive and negative. So there's one class positive, the other class is negative. Um, since we are in a supervised learning setting, we have some training data. Suppose we have n labeled images x and yn. N goes from 1 to capital N. Xn is a d-dimensional feature vector, and yn is a binary label, -1 or a +1. Let's assume that we have n plus positive examples and n minus negative examples. And moreover, we will assume that the positive class is shown in green color, negative class is shown in red color. So since each input is a vector, it can be represented in some vector space. For simplicity, let's assume that all the inputs are two-dimensional, and then they have been represented in this 2D space. So this is the red negative class. So each of these stars is one of the inputs. Likewise, each of these green stars is one of the inputs from the positive class. So we have the data from the training data from each of these two classes. Given this training data, we can compute the mean of each class. So for the red class, we can compute the mean, which we will refer to as mu minus. For the green class, and mu minus is nothing but the mean of all the examples with a label -1. Likewise, we can compute the mean of the green class, which we will denote as mu plus, and mu plus can be computed as the mean of all the examples that are from the that are having label yn equal to +1. So for the learning with prototype models, these vectors that we have computed, mu minus and mu plus, these are essentially defining our model. So if you ask as to what is the model, well, these two vectors are essentially defining the learning with prototype model. Now we get a new test example. We compute the distance of this test example from each of these two prototypes. Since in this case the test example was closer to the negative prototype, it got labeled as red. Likewise, for this new test example, we again compute the distance from both prototypes, and in this case this test example happens to be closer to the green class, so it gets labeled as green. So that is how learning with prototypes approach works. Now, even though this example is for binary classification, where we just have data from two classes, this approach readily generalizes to more than two classes as well, which is an example of a multi-class classification problem. So if you have data from k classes, then we would compute k such prototypes, and then the test time will be same. You will get a test example, you will compute the distance of the test example from each of the k prototypes, and depending on which prototype is the closest to the test example, you will label the test example by that class. We can also look at the prediction rule of learning with prototypes in a more formal mathematical way. Now, for simplicity, suppose we are using Euclidean distances in this learning with prototypes classifier. So as before, we have data from these two classes, positive class and negative class. We have the means of these classes, mu plus and mu minus, and we have a test example x. So what we do in learning with prototypes, well, we compute the distance of the test point x from the negative class. In this example, we computed it, this distance from the negative class. So mu minus minus x squared Euclidean norm, which expands to this quantity, this expression. Likewise, we compute the distance of x from mu plus, which again expands to this expression. So these two expressions give the squared Euclidean distance of the test point from each of these two class prototypes. Now, what was the prediction rule in this case? Well, we predict label 1 if this quantity f of x, which is given by the difference of the distance of x from the negative prototype and from the positive prototype. So if we look at the squared Euclidean distances, then if fx is greater than 0, it means that the point is closer to the positive class than the negative class. Okay, so in that case we predict label as +1, otherwise we predict the label as -1. So this fx, which is written like this, defines the prediction rule of learning with prototypes in a mathematical form. We can further expand this prediction rule and see what it ends up looking like. So again, as we saw in the previous slide, fx, this function of x was defined like this. If fx is greater than 0, then we labeled the image as or the input as +1, otherwise it was labeled as -1. So this quantity expands to this, as we already saw, and some terms cancel out, and then what you get in the end is this quantity or this expression. It's 2 times inner product of these two, this difference vector with x, and then the squared Euclidean norm of the negative class prototype minus the squared Euclidean norm of the positive class prototype. So fx can be written more compactly like this. Further, we can write or denote this difference vector as a single vector w, and this difference term as a scalar b, because these norms are scalar quantities, so b will also be a scalar. Mu minus and mu plus are vectors, which is why w will be again a vector of size d. So fx, as you can see, can be written as the inner product of a weight vector w with the input test input x. So fx is w transpose x plus b, or inner product of w and x and plus b. Now this specific form that we are looking at right now, w transpose x plus b, is essentially a linear model, because we have a model that is linear in the parameters. So we have and in this case, this w vector is referred to a weight vector. In this case, w is defined like this, and b is referred to as the bias term, which is defined like this. Okay, and just to kind of write this prediction rule more compactly, we can say that we will predict +1 if w transpose x plus b is greater than 0, or otherwise we'll predict -1. Now, as I said, learning with prototypes, when used with Euclidean distance, not in all cases, mind you, is equivalent to a linear model. Now we will look at linear models in more detail and in a more formal sense later on, but I just wanted to point out that even a simple model like learning with prototype, when used with a specific type of distance, in particular the Euclidean distance, turns out to be equivalent to a linear model. So we have seen that learning with prototypes is an extremely simple model. However, there are cases where this model can fail as well. So here is a particular example. So in this case, I have deliberately drawn the classes such that there is a lot of variability along one of the dimensions. In the red class, negative class, I have a lot of variability along this direction, and the positive class is kind of more compact. So in this case, we have again, as usual, computed the means or the class prototypes, mu plus and mu minus. And suppose we get a test example which falls somewhere here. Now, as you can clearly see, if once we have a test example here, to make the prediction for this test example, we will compute the distance from both prototypes. And clearly, as you can see in this case, the distance from the positive class happens to be smaller than the distance from the negative class. So the model will predict the label of this test example as green, which is a misprediction, because if you just look at these examples closely, then this test example kind of appears to be belonging to the negative class, even though the model, the learning with prototype model with Euclidean distance, because note that we used a specific distance. In this case, we used the Euclidean distance, not the weighted Euclidean distance, not a Mahalanobis distance, just the plain Euclidean distance. And using that distance for this particular example, the test example was misclassified. Okay, so this is an example where learning with prototype with Euclidean distance may not work very well. And in fact, there are various other cases where a learning with prototype classifier may not work very well. In particular, if your classes are not of equal size, which is clearly not the case here, these classes are indeed not of equal size, and if they are not spherical, then if you're using learning with prototype with Euclidean distance, it will most likely fail. Okay, so if you have some intuition about the problem that, well, your classes are not of equal size, they are not spherical, then do not go with the learning with prototype with Euclidean distance. It will most likely fail. There are definitely some improvements possible which will prevent this from happening. We will discuss these improvements in the next class. So in fact, there are some, in fact, I have already alluded to some of the improvements. For instance, you can use something like a weighted Euclidean distance, or even feature scaling, which is related to weighted Euclidean distance, to handle such cases. We will look at it in more detail in the next class. Okay, so as I said, feature scaling or weighted Euclidean distance or Mahalanobis distance, they all can be used to fix these issues where learning with prototype fails. So before I conclude for today's lecture, I would just discuss some of the key aspects of learning with prototypes. I'll just summarize what learning with prototype is good for and what it is not so good for. Firstly, it's a very simple, highly interpretable model, and it's a very lightweight model. Simple because all it requires is computing means and computing distances. Interpretable because it is defined by just two prototypes, and it has a very simple linear model interpretation, as we already saw in one of the previous slides. So it's also very interpretable. It's a simple linear model, of course, only when used with Euclidean distance. It's also a rather lightweight model because the model size, which is defined by how many parameters it needs to store at test time. So we note that you only need to store the class prototypes. Okay, and in fact, you just need to store the difference of the class prototypes in the case of binary classification. As you saw that, the weight vector W that we saw in the previous slide was nothing but a difference of the the two class prototypes. So you only need to store that vector at test time to make the prediction. Learning with prototype also works with any number of classes. So if you have more than two classes, the idea is readily generalizable. You simply compute the mean of or a prototype for each class. As I mentioned earlier, even though the basic learning with prototype with the Euclidean distance may fail in some cases, we can generalize the learning with prototype approach with various other, using various other ways to further improve the performance. One very specific generalization that we will look at in one of the later lectures is to replace each class by or to model each class by a probability distribution. So note that in learning with prototype, we simply collapsed the class into a single prototype vector. Okay, and in doing that, we lost all the information about what was the spread of the class. Okay, on the other hand, if you model every class by a probability distribution, then it will kind of more appropriately capture the spread of the class. So modeling every class by a probability distribution rather than just a prototype vector will make this approach more robust. We will look at this approach in one of the later lectures. And of course, as I mentioned, if we replace the standard Euclidean distance by some other distances, then this approach generalizes and it becomes more robust. Okay. Uh, Finally, we can so even though we can use various types of distances like Mahalanobis, weighted Mahalanobis to improve the performance of learning with prototypes, we can even go a step further and we can actually use a learned distance function, okay, rather than just a predefined distance function like Euclidean or weighted Euclidean or Mahalanobis. So in fact, if you can somehow learn this distance function, then the performance of learning with prototypes can improve drastically. And in fact, it can improve to the extent such that you only need very few examples from each class to learn a very good model. So in fact, there is some recent work in the area of few shot learning where the idea is to learn good predictive models from very few examples per class. These kind of models nowadays are using prototypic, learning with prototype based methods, but with a distance function that is learned from data. So if you are interested in this approach, you should check out this paper called Prototypical Networks for Few Shot Learning. This is a very recent paper from 2017, I believe, which actually shows you how you can use the learning with prototype approach with a learnable distance function, and that really like gives the model the ability to learn with very few examples per class. Because typically, in order for learning with prototype to work well, you need a sufficient amount of training data to capture the variability in each class. However, if you have very few examples, then you can actually use this few shot learning approach outlined in this paper. Okay, so with that, I would conclude for today's lecture. In the next class, I will spend some time talking about how we can fix learning with prototype using different kinds of distance metrics or distance functions, and then we will move on to discussing the second approach based on computing distances, which is the nearest neighbors approach. Yeah, see you in the next lecture.